The desert remembers everything: the shimmer of gold, the whisper of betrayal, the hoofbeats of empire. In the early 20th century, as the Ottoman world trembled and the Great War raged, Britain's hand reached deep into Arabia's shifting sands. Promises of freedom were traded for coins and deceit, and tribes once bound by honor were torn apart by ambition. The Bedouins, guardians of the desert's pride, found themselves entangled in the empire's quietest war, not fought with armies, but with whispers, contracts, and betrayal. What began as alliance would end as division, and the desert would keep its silence. The Arabian Peninsula was a world of wind and silence, where tribes ruled the vast emptiness through honor, loyalty, and survival. The Bedouin code was simple: to live by the land and die with dignity. But in 1914, as the Great War cast its long shadow, even the sands could not stay untouched. Britain saw in Arabia more than deserts. It saw opportunity, routes, and rebellion waiting to be purchased. To the British, the Ottoman Empire was an old rival choking the Middle East. To the tribes, it was a distant authority, respected by some, resented by others. When British agents arrived disguised as scholars and explorers, they came not with armies, but with gold and promises. They spoke of independence, of unity under a single Arab banner. To men weary of Ottoman taxes and foreign rule, those words glimmered like mirages of freedom. The first meetings took place in tents lit by oil lamps and suspicion. The Bedouin sheiks listened, weighing every word, every pouch of coin. Britain needed them to rise, to cut the Ottoman lifelines, to make the desert a weapon. Lawrence of Arabia would become the face of that plan, the Englishman who wore Arab robes and spoke of liberation. But behind the veil of friendship, London's strategy was clear: divide, finance, control. Tribal loyalty, once bound by centuries of kinship, began to fracture under the weight of gold. Some tribes pledged to fight the Turks for promises of power. Others remained loyal to their old faith in the caliphate. Where once there was unity in the face of the harsh desert, now there was rivalry. The sands that had hidden caravans now hid conspiracies, and Britain fed both with quiet precision. As the revolt spread, so did the illusion. The British Empire presented itself as the liberator of Arabia, yet every coin exchanged carried the mark of manipulation. The Bedouin riders who galloped under the banner of freedom did not yet know that their victories would be claimed in foreign offices thousands of miles away. What was born in the desert as rebellion would be rewritten in London as strategy. Gold, the quiet conqueror. It gleamed not on battlefields but in the palms of British envoys who understood the desert's oldest truth: loyalty has a price. The empire arrived not only with guns and flags, but with coins heavy enough to bend conviction. They knew that in Arabia, gold could move mountains that armies could not. Across the vast sands, British agents moved like whispers. Men such as T. Lawrence carried bags of gold sovereigns as if they were weapons. In tents lit by oil lamps, they spoke softly of freedom, unity, and revolt. Each coin placed on the table was a promise, one that shimmered with deceit. Chiefs were courted with wealth and rifles, their allegiance purchased with illusions of independence. The empire sold dreams it never meant to deliver. Where once tribes had gathered as brothers, gold built walls between them. Suspicion replaced kinship, and greed seeped into the dunes. The British, masters of manipulation, sowed rivalry with careful precision. One tribe was told the other plotted betrayal. Another was promised dominance if they acted first. Soon, alliances dissolved like mirages. The desert, once bound by honor, became a chessboard of British design, each move paid in gold and trust lost in dust. Even Lawrence saw the cost. Behind his legend of courage lay the weight of contradiction. He rode with men who believed in liberation while serving masters who believed in control. For every handshake, there was a hidden map. For every gift, a secret agreement drawn in London's smoke-filled rooms. Britain did not seek allies, it sought instruments. And gold was its language of command. When the coins stopped flowing, the truth could no longer hide beneath banners of unity. The tribes, left fractured and betrayed, understood that the empire's friendship had been nothing but a transaction. The gold that had glittered so brightly now lay tarnished beneath the sand, a symbol not of power, but of deceit. And though time would bury the men who took it, the desert kept their memory. For in Arabia, even the wind remembers the weight of betrayal. The desert once sang with the rhythm of brotherhood, tribes united by lineage, honor, and the vast silence of shared struggle. But when gold met pride, the song turned to discord. The British did not need armies to conquer Arabia. They needed only to whisper. One chieftain was told he was destined to lead the new Arab nation, another that his neighbor had already betrayed the cause. Lies drifted through the dunes like sandstorms, unseen but suffocating. The alliances that had once held firm under the weight of empire now cracked under the weight of suspicion. Promises of freedom became the empire's most powerful weapon. British agents cloaked manipulation and diplomacy, convincing each tribe that they alone were the chosen partners of London's grand design. Maps were drawn in secret, agreements signed in smoke and shadows. The Arabs, inspired by dreams of independence, fought not for Britain, but for their own imagined sovereignty. Yet as their banners rose in the desert wind, their unity fractured beneath the empire's guiding hand. Where once stood one cause, now stood many, each facing the other, blinded by ambition and doubt. As the war raged, betrayal grew roots deeper than any sword could cut. Skirmishes between tribes no longer served the Ottoman enemy, but the empire's purpose. British gold financed rebellion, but also division. One tribe struck another, believing they were securing their nation. In truth, they were clearing Britain's path. The desert, once the cradle of resistance, became a mirror of empire, divided, controlled, and bleeding from within. Even those who saw through the deceit were trapped. To refuse the empire's gold was to lose power. To accept it was to lose honor. It was a choice between survival and soul. When the dust settled, the victory Britain claimed was not over the Ottomans, but over unity itself. The dream of a single Arab nation, fierce, free, and bound by faith, lay buried beneath the ruins of trust. Tribes that had once fought shoulder to shoulder now measured strength by the weight of their betrayal. The empire had conquered without conquest, won without glory. And as the sun set over the broken camps of the desert, the wind carried a bitter truth, that sometimes the greatest defeat comes not from an enemy's sword, but from a friend's hand. The desert had been promised a dawn, a golden horizon where Arabs would rule their own lands, free from Ottoman chains and Western command. Britain's emissaries spoke of independence with the eloquence of saviors. Flags of revolt fluttered beside Union Jacks, and each battle won felt like a step toward liberation. But beneath the glow of victory, another hand moved quietly, sketching lines across maps in rooms far from the sands. While warriors bled for freedom under the blazing sun, gentlemen in London and Paris divided that same freedom with ink and deceit. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, a pact whispered in secrecy, was the empire's unseen conquest. It turned the dream of unity into a mirage shimmering on the horizon, always visible, never within reach. The British and French carved the Arab world into spheres of influence, measuring borders not by culture or faith, but by convenience. The letters of T. E. Lawrence's promises and the words of envoys meant to inspire loyalty became tools of manipulation, the poetry of empire disguised as partnership. The Arabs, believing themselves architects of their own nation, had in truth become bricks in someone else's design. As the war's dust began to settle, the realization came like a storm breaking over the desert. Leaders who had once toasted victory now received news of betrayal sealed by distant hands. The same British officers who had sworn brotherhood now avoided their gaze. Independence, once a heartbeat away, dissolved into occupation, mandate, and control. Across the Levant and Mesopotamia, rebellion sparked anew, not against the Turks this time, but against the very allies who had promised deliverance. The empire, unchallenged in diplomacy, had outmaneuvered a revolution by rewriting its outcome before it began. In the end, the mirage of freedom lingered, a cruel reflection of what could have been. The Arab fighters who had crossed deserts and spilled blood for liberty returned to lands renamed, redrawn, and restrained. The banners of revolt were replaced by new flags designed in foreign capitals. The cry for sovereignty turned to silence, muffled beneath treaties written in English and French. And as night fell across the Middle East, the stars shone upon a truth older than empire, that promises made in war rarely survive peace. The desert had been deceived not by might, but by hope itself. He rode through the desert like a myth, white robes billowing, golden sand curling around his feet, a stranger who spoke the language of tribes and the code of empire. To the Arabs, Lawrence was a bridge between worlds, a man who listened when others commanded. He shared their fires, their battles, and their dreams of liberation. His words carried both the poetry of conviction and the shadow of deceit. For while Lawrence fought beside them, his nation fought above them, shaping the outcome long before the war had ended. The legend of Lawrence of Arabia was born not in the heat of battle, but in the cold precision of propaganda. Britain needed a hero, a face to turn betrayal into glory, a narrative to make empire look noble. Newspapers painted him as the liberator of the East, the lone idealist who gave Arabs their freedom. But the truth lay buried beneath those headlines. The same Lawrence who stormed Aqaba and whispered unity to tribal chiefs knew of Sykes-Picot long before the Arabs did. He knew the dream was doomed, yet he rode on, bound by loyalty, guilt, and the illusion of purpose. When victory finally came, Lawrence vanished from the very stage that had made him immortal. The desert he once crossed in triumph now echoed with the voices of men who had fought for a lie. Damascus, promised as the heart of a new Arab nation, fell under foreign control. Lawrence, torn between duty and conscience, retreated into silence. His fame became a cage, his story a shield for those who had drawn the knife of betrayal. The empire he served immortalized him not for his truth, but for his usefulness, turning guilt into legend and legend into myth. In the end, Lawrence became the empire's greatest deception, not because he betrayed the Arabs, but because he believed he could save them within a system built to exploit them. His tragedy was not failure, but faith. Faith in promises that were never meant to be kept. The desert remembered him, not as a savior, but as a symbol, a man who tried to speak truth inside the heart of a lie. And when the wind sweeps across Aqaba or whispers through the ruins of Damascus, it carries his confession still, that even the purest heart can serve the darkest empire. When the guns fell silent and the maps were redrawn, Arabia did not rejoice. It remembered. The promises of freedom had turned to echoes carried by the wind, and the gold that once bought allegiance now weighed like chains upon the soul of the desert. Britain withdrew its banners, but its influence lingered in the fractures it had carved. The tribes that once rode together beneath the dream of unity were left to measure the cost of their divided loyalty. In the emptiness of the dunes, silence became a form of mourning, not for the dead, but for the truth that never came. In the years that followed, new kings rose upon old betrayals. Flags changed, empires crumbled, but the agreements signed in secrecy outlived their makers. The borders drawn by foreign pens cut through families, trade routes, and memory itself. The mirage of independence shimmered under new sunlight, fragile, conditional, controlled. The desert watched, unmoved, as nations took shape not from the will of their people, but from the convenience of those who once paid them in gold. Every grain of sand seemed to whisper the same story: freedom promised, freedom postponed. Yet the desert, patient and eternal, does not forget. Beneath its vast silence lies the memory of rebellion, of riders who defied both empire and fear, of men who believed unity was worth dying for. The Bedouin songs that once guided caravans now carry the names of those who resisted betrayal. Around campfires, stories of the British and their spies survive like embers in the dark, not to glorify vengeance, but to preserve truth. For in this land, history is not written in books. It is carried in the wind, sung beneath the stars, and buried with the fallen. The British called it strategy. The Arabs called it betrayal. But the desert calls it something else: remembrance. It endures long after empires fade and monuments crumble. It watches each intruder with quiet judgment, knowing that no map, no coin, no flag can ever own its heart. In the shifting sands of Arabia, power is temporary, but memory is eternal. The gold has tarnished, the treaties have faded, yet the betrayal gleams still, not as a scar, but as a lesson. And as dusk falls over the dunes, the wind whispers the final truth. The empire left, but the desert never forgot. History often buries its betrayals beneath victory's applause, but the desert remembers every footprint. The Bedouin betrayal was not merely a story of spies and gold. It was the quiet undoing of trust, the trade of unity for illusion. The British left Arabia with maps and medals, but the tribes were left with something far heavier: the knowledge that freedom cannot be bought and faith cannot be forged in deceit. Today, the echoes of that era still drift through the dunes, in borders drawn by strangers, in rivalries born from coins once spent in secret. Yet beneath it all, the heart of the desert beats unbroken. It has seen empires rise and vanish like mirages, but its people endure. For in the end, history belongs not to those who betray, but to those who remember. This has been After Time, where history breathes and forgotten truths rise from the dust. If this story moved you, don't let it fade into silence. Subscribe to After Time for more untold histories, the empires, the betrayals, the victories time tried to bury. Like, share, and leave your thoughts below. Every voice helps keep these echoes alive. Join us again as we journey through the shadows of the past, uncovering the moments that shaped our world. Until next time, remember, history never dies, it only waits to be heard.